and welcome to the Semiconductor Leadership Podcast, the platform that dives deep into the stories, insights, and strategies of the semiconductor industry.
I never would have envisioned that I would be here today. And what is the secret sauce? It's about being curious, being driven, being motivated. But I always knew that there was something more than what I was experiencing. Because I could have had a very good career, very comfortable career working for Ford. I realized that being good at what you do is not enough. This is the wrong environment for you. You have to understand how to become a good executive, how to become a good corporate employee. The issue has gone from supply continuity to supply security.
What I would love to know, and I have never asked you this question, even though I've known you for a few years now, is what initially attracted you to procurement and supply chain management?
Opportunity.
Join us as we welcome Dr. Jeffrey Wincel, Senior Vice President and Chief Procurement Officer at NXP Semiconductors.
With over 20 years in supply chain management,
He'll share insights on the challenges and opportunities in the semiconductor industry. Let's dive in.
Hello, and welcome to the Semiconductor Leadership Podcast, the platform that dives deep into the stories, insights, and strategies of the semiconductor industry. I'm your host, Salah Nasri, and to everyone that's listening, whether you're an industry veteran or just curious about the world of semiconductor manufacturing, this podcast is designed to bring you valuable lessons from the brightest minds in the industry. From cutting-edge R&D to leadership strategies to global trends, we will explore it all. So before we get started, I want to ask you a sincere favor. Please take a moment to subscribe to the podcast on YouTube and Spotify. In a very, very short time of starting this podcast, we hit 2,000 followers. The goal this year is to hit 10,000 followers. The more followers we get, the more interesting and dynamic this podcast will become. And it really helps us keep bringing you the best conversations in the semiconductor industry. For example, our special guest today. And in today's episode, we're joined by Dr. Jeffrey Wincel, Senior Vice President and Chief Procurement Officer at NXP Semiconductors. So without further ado, let's jump into the conversation. Welcome to the podcast, Jeff. It is great to have you here.
Good to see you. Thanks for inviting me. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. Really, it means a lot to myself. And this is actually the first one-to-one interview discussion that I'm doing.
Thank you.
So it is. Normally I'm known for whatever I touch turns to gold. So this is going to be a historical moment having you here. I'm very, very glad to have you here. And I just want to start, Jeff, from your perspective, with every story and every moment in life, there's a beginning. I'd love to hear about yourself. Like, where did you grow up? How was life for you? What was the environment that you were in to get you to that, education, academic era per se?
Perfect. Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. I've been asked about this a lot. I speak at conferences and I teach at ASU and other places. And people ask me, how did you get to be where you are? And what is the secret sauce?
Okay.
Well, my answer is there is no secret sauce, okay? It's about being curious, being driven, being motivated. If I would have looked back when I was 18 years old or even in high school, I never would have envisioned that I would be here today. And the reason for that is I grew up in a family that was from very modest means, very modest background, very blue collar. I grew up in the Detroit area in Michigan, went to City High School in Dearborn, Michigan. Never envisioned that I would even go to a university because my family, that was not our history. Not just my immediate family, but our extended family. But I always knew that there was something more than what I was experiencing. So I kind of cobbled together some opportunity, and I got a scholarship to go to Michigan State. Went to the university, and the way I describe it is I was able to squeeze a 4-year program into 5 years. Okay. So it was a lot of work. I had to work from the day I walked into the university until the day I got out. And at the time when I graduated with my bachelor's degree, I had a bachelor's of science in labor relations, was not a great economy. So trying to find a job was very difficult. So I ended up going back to school to get my MBA in what at the time they called Materials and Logistics Management, which is now supply chain. After that is where everything kind of took off. I had a lot of opportunity. I began my career in the automotive world. I worked for Ford and General Motors, and then I moved on to some tier one automotive companies. And I think for me, that was the key moment of making my career possible, because I could have had a very good career, very comfortable career working for Ford. I was working in Dearborn. But taking the risk, taking the opportunity to find something different and do something different, I think really changed the trajectory of my life. Many people around me are like, why would you want to do that? You're working for a great company. You're making good money. Why do you want to change? And it was all about that curiosity. It was about taking risk. Now, I remember that first job I took outside of Ford. I thought, what did I do? Why did I make this change? You know, it was interesting because as a buyer, as a commodity manager at Ford, it seemed as if no matter what you did was going to be successful. So I thought I was the greatest negotiator in the world. Well, I wasn't. What I did have was a wonderful company behind me with many resources that all kind of suppliers wanted to work with. When I went out to this much smaller company, I realized now I'm going to have to start working for a living and really think about strategies and think about how do we make this work in an environment that's very different, because the power dynamic shifted significantly. Instead of me being a buyer with a large corporation behind me, companies, knocking on your door to work with you, now here I am, small company, begging suppliers who sometimes are much larger than me to work with me. So that changed everything. But at that same time, I began looking at writing, so I have a number of books in publication. I began looking at conferences and teaching, and I realized that I had to continue to develop who I was as a person, the skills that I had to continue to be relevant. So I was in that world for probably 10 years, and then I described my career kind of in 3 phases. So there's the typical university job career, and then I transitioned into an entrepreneurial career. And it was more by chance than by design, but for 11 years I had a very successful supply chain consulting company, which is what originally drew me into the semiconductor world, because some of my very first clients were semiconductor equipment suppliers. Again, had to change, had to recognize what are the challenges in front of the companies, how can I help them solve those challenges, and then provide them the tools to implement. And then I moved here to Arizona a little over 10 years ago, and I thought, okay, now it's time to reevaluate where I am and what do I want to do when I grow up. So I made the decision to go back into the corporate world, and that's what led me into semiconductors. First with ON Semiconductor, then with AMD, and now finally here with NXP Semiconductors. So a lot of things happened. For me, I thought it was a very exciting journey, but as I said, never anticipated that I would be, or have the opportunity even to be where I am today.
I mean, of course, I know your history in terms of your career, but what really caught my attention was that you started your career in purchasing at TRW, and then later you transitioned to Donnelley Corporation. So were there any key moments or early challenges that kind of shaped your approach to procurement and supply chain or leadership or management at that time? Or
yeah, so I think what really shaped my approach was, again, this is going back first working to Ford, knowing that I wanted to have a successful career and promotional opportunities. I realized that being good at what you do is not enough. You have to be good at the next thing and the thing after that, even if it's not part of what you're currently responsible for, and being a very valuable resource to your management staff. So I took that to TRW, I took that to Donnelley Corporation, but I also recognize that careers are so delicate that you have to make sure you're making the right decision. So if you make the wrong decision, you have to be willing to change. Certainly you want to kind of put in the work and you got to ride it out as long as you can, but you have to recognize that point where this is the wrong environment for you. Your skills, your desires, your experience doesn't fit this company or this environment, so you got to be willing to do something new.
And I mean, shifting from that type of experience that you had and going into the AMDs and the on-semis and then, of course, now at NXP. What I would love to know, and I have never asked you this question, even though I've known you for a few years now, is what initially attracted you to procurement and supply chain management?
Opportunity.
Opportunity.
Yeah, so when I was getting my MBA, again, the economy was difficult, but there was one major which people were getting offer after offer after offer. I mean, you know, even at the time, it was Apple making offers. It was the automotive companies in Michigan. It was technology. Hewlett-Packard at the time was very strong. Medical device. So I'm kind of pragmatic. Okay. I was like, okay, how am I going to get the job? And this was the degree and the career that fit. And so when I, came out of graduate school, I went from a bachelor's degree where I couldn't get an interview to an MBA where I had 8 or 10 offers on the table, and I could choose what industry, what company, what part of the country. Wow. That, so to me, that was the watershed moment.
And you've been named one of the pros to know multiple times throughout your career. What does it take to become a true leader in the procurement field, and what differentiates those who make an impact?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 or 3 things. I think first is you have to be a visionary to understand how something as everyday as procurement can become essential to a business. So you can't just understand how to be a good buyer, a good commodity manager, or a good procurement leader, but you have to understand how to become a good executive, how to become a good corporate employee, understanding what is the vision that the company is trying to achieve and positioning your organization to help deliver that. So I had said throughout my career that in most companies, purchasing and procurement is kind of seen as a cost center. These are the guys and the women who just process the orders, and you got to change that perspective. You really have to drive value. And so instead of becoming a cost center, you want to try to figure out how to become a profit center. How does the work that we do directly contribute to the bottom line? And how does the bottom line directly contribute to earnings per share and then, PE ratio for the price of the stock? When you do that and you change that thinking in your organization, then you become value to the company. So that, I think, is kind of number one. I think the second piece is, how do you take disciplines that are different than your own but incorporate them into the purchasing and procurement environment? So early in my career, and this is going back to when I was at Donnelly Corporation, our senior VP of operations had come from Toyota in Georgetown. So he was expert in lean manufacturing and TPS. That intrigued me. How can I take TPS methodologies and drive that back into supply chain? So that was the genesis for my initial book, which was Lean Supply Chain Management, was taking these different kinds of tools and techniques and bringing them together. So being a good scientist, being a good synthesizer of all these different things, I think really helps. And then the third piece, to me, is away from the corporate world, is how do you remain engaged in education, training, development, other interests, so your view isn't just myopic to your company or your industry, but really is a global view, and you can bring many things in to the value of the company.
Yeah, I think this is a very kind of hits home on my side because, as you know, I did this executive program at Stanford. So, you realize there are so many gaps that we don't see in the professional world that theory kind of covers because it's happened in many case studies before.
Right.
So it is a very, very valid point on that perspective. And from your time when you were at TRW, which is totally different to what you're doing now in terms of leading procurement at a semiconductor company, how has the landscape of supply chain evolved from your perspective, particularly in the semiconductor industry?
Yeah, I would start by saying I'm not sure that the landscape is very much different. So although at the time when I was at TRW, I was responsible for the airbag division, so buying, and this is right when the inflatable restraints really began being pushed in the automotive world. But I think we have a unique opportunity in procurement is that our skills are more fungible between industries. Okay. So it's really about how do you take the best of what you've seen in each of those industries and apply them into semiconductors. Where I think the biggest change, however, has occurred is really in the global view and the absence of borders. I mean, even with the geopolitical issues that we have, the truth of the matter is, at least in semiconductors, I'm buying all around the world. I'm buying not only in countries all over the world, but I'm buying to support manufacturing sites all over the world. And I'm buying to support customers all over the world. So all these issues that come up, my responsibility and my peers' responsibility is to find the solution to be able to do that. So I think that's perhaps the biggest change over the course of my career. When you look at the tools and techniques across industries, I think that's where the biggest gain is to be made. So I would contrast it, TRW in the automotive industry. When you were manufacturing or designing and manufacturing a product for a new vehicle, there's a timeline, and you have to hit the timeline. And there is time pressure. And so when I moved over into semiconductors and they talk about how fast-paced time is, I'm like, what are you guys talking about? This is a different world. And although, especially if you're in computing and other things, you have an 18 to 24-month new product cycle, but it tends to be variations of prior versions, okay? And the timing is not quite the same. The quality requirements are not quite the same unless you're selling into an automotive segment. Because if I have a cell phone and it stops working because a chip fails, it's an annoyance, it's a nuisance. If I'm driving down, I-10 at 85 miles an hour and a chip fails and my car goes out of control or stops working, that's a different world. So I think the learning across those industries has been good, at least for me. So I look at it, and I think I mentioned this earlier, it's about kind of recreating yourself throughout your career and then drawing these ideas and remaining connected to other industries. So, I was just last week, I was in Northern California for an ISM, the Institute of Supply Management, and CAPS joint meeting, which is the Center for Advanced Purchasing Studies. And so the whole point of that was bringing people together from different industries. We were talking about geopolitical issues or, problems. We were talking about AI in the procurement and supply chain world. So you got to stay connected. And that's that timeline that draws you, across your career from, as you mentioned, TRW in automotive to NXP in semiconductors. You have to fill out, what are all those things I can draw in?
Yeah. I mean, what I would be also intrigued, and I think the audience would be intrigued to know, is that the responsibilities on your shoulders are heavy. And you're dealing not on a local scale, it's a global scale, across borders. What does a day in your life or a day in your role look like? And how do you manage the complexities of global procurement in today's market? I'd be intrigued to know about that.
Sure. I would start by saying there's probably no day that looks like the prior
same
day or is going to look like the next day. What is common, though, especially in the company I work for, is that we're a European-based company, major presence in Europe, major presence in North America, major presence in Asia. So my days start very early and end very late. So it's not uncommon for my day to start with meetings beginning at 5:30 and then going until 10 or 11 o'clock at night. And so you manage your schedule differently. So instead of it being a 9-to-5 job that I come in and I go home, is I come in, I have meetings, I have blocks of time, I may go home, I may do other things, and you have to manage that differently. I think perhaps the most important thing is to understand that business approaches don't apply the same way in various regions around the world. You could have the exact same tool. So TPS was a great methodology of this. So you take the Toyota production system and you have it in Japan. It's different than it is if it's in North America. And it's going to be very different even in other parts of Asia, whether that's China, Southeast Asia, et cetera. So you have to be very, not necessarily concerned with, but aware of the cultural differences of the people and how they view their role in the jobs that they have. So here in the United States, we're the Wild West, okay? We still are. People have this sense of, I am going to do whatever it takes. I am going to, even if I'm not asked to often, I'm going to fix this issue, I'm going to step up and I'm going to do it. In other parts of the world, it's, I'm going to wait until my leaders tell me what it is I'm supposed to do.
Right.
So you have to be aware of, okay, what am I asking people to do? One, do they understand what I'm saying? Two, what they're telling me they're going to do or how they respond, do I understand what they are saying? And then 3, how does this really practically happen? So I think that's the biggest challenge in that area, especially globally. Kind of the rest of my day, this has been probably for me one of the most, if not the most rewarding positions I've had in my career. And the reason I say that is because I have the standard procurement stuff. We do commodity strategy, we engage suppliers, we work with our internal stakeholders, we negotiate price. I came in the middle of the pandemic, and supply crisis, which couldn't have been any more interesting. Negotiating contracts and capacity corridors. Now with slowdowns, negotiating those corridors away, but also because of a lot of the work we've done with mergers and acquisitions, I've been involved with that. I'm at what they call MT+1, so I'm one level below the CEO staff. So you're drawn into many, many more things. I think what I look at now is my responsibility, not only in delivering to what the company asked me, but maybe equally or perhaps even more importantly, is how do I develop my staff? How do I develop my teams further in the organization? So I think that's really what my days look like, is kind of that 5 a.m. staff meeting across the globe to individual one-on-ones that I'll have with a commodity manager. And, today, just before I came here, we were talking about global gas and chemical commodities and what does, cost indices look like. And, so it can go from being way in the weeds to 40,000-foot view.
Short break. I'd like to let you all know I am the president and CEO of the International Semiconductor Industry Group, a global leading association that gathers leaders and executives in a trusted network. I'd like to invite you all to the International Semiconductor Executive Summit, Southeast Asia, on November the 5th to the 6th. It'll be held in Penang, Malaysia. The lineup is sensational as always at any ISES event. We have Kok Tiong Ung, who's the SVP and Managing Director of Infineon Technologies Kulim, Yvonne Kyle, the Senior Director of GF Operations, Koen de Bakker, Corporate Vice President of Smart Manufacturing and AI at Micron Technologies, Dr. Jin Young Kim, who's the Senior Vice President of Global R&D and Strategy at Amcor, and there's many great other companies with leaders representing them from Schneider, Electric, Inari, SSIA, Airspace, and so on and so forth. So it's a great event. The link is at the bottom of this video. Please do check it out, click it. If you have colleagues in the region, do forward it to them. It's an incredible summit to participate in. And it's also backed by the Penang Skills Development Center, PSDC. So you can also claim some money back to join. Other than that, let's get back to the show. Do you see, of course, global supply chains have been under immense pressure, especially during the pandemic. What are the biggest challenges are you seeing today? And you'll hear, I recall certain case studies in terms of, mining situations and getting certain materials from certain areas is quite a very sensitive topic to be managed on a day-to-day basis in the semiconductor procurement supply chain world. I'd be intrigued to hear, what are the biggest challenges that you're seeing today, your team's seeing today, and how is NXP positioning itself to stay resilient and competitive, but also care thinking for the world as well at the same time?
Right. Well, I think the issue has gone from supply continuity to supply security. So supply continuity was simply, do I have the source or sources of material and I'm assured some flow to help me continue to manufacture my product? The supply crisis showed us that we were way too dependent on certain parts of the world that may or may not have friendly geopolitical, intentions and governments. So looking at how do we tailor our supply chain strategy on a more regionalized basis with much more flexibility and diversity, I think has really become important. For us as a company, ESG is one of our major initiatives, and it's not just because, this is what our stakeholders are asking for, our shareholders, but this is what we as a company believe. So, we're already looking at Scope 3. How do we implement Scope 3 ESG? And that means how are we engaging our suppliers in a way that makes sense from not only an environmental standpoint, but from a true global citizen's standpoint. Again, kind of going back to this cultural conversation, this has a lot of resonance. It makes a lot of sense in Europe, particularly. Yeah. Much same or similar in the U.S. But once you start getting in other parts of the world, it's like, what are you talking about? Yeah. What do you mean? So even things like gender diversity, that has a lot of gravitas here in the United States. Yep. You have that same conversation in certain parts of Asia. You're like, what do you mean? What are you talking about? It's not important to us. So it's not only trying to achieve those outcomes, but also educating people along the way. Why is this important to us as a company? Why is it important as a global citizen? And this is why we're doing those things. So it becomes very challenging to, kind of tick all those boxes simultaneously.
Yeah. I mean, do you feel that, from your perspective, that there's only a certain amount of responsibility that you can handle, and you have to kind of just like lay it off to your peers to deal with those type of matters per se, and just let them do it?
Maybe.
Or do the fingers get pointed back to you if something goes wrong? Or?
Yeah, so I don't know that I would describe it as laying it off to the peers, but what I would say is there's very little that would come my way either from my boss for sure, or other parts of the organization, or even things, I've always heard when there's a fire, run towards the fire and not away from it. Sure. That's how you make yourself valuable. So I've been one of those kind of people. Now, that's different than saying I'm going to take this from, cradle to grave. I'll probably be the person who will go in, understand what the issues are, help design, kind of the initial steps that we're going to take, and then trust and empower people to do the work, but always be there as a resource. So that's different than, I think, as you said, laying it off to your peers, because that's kind of like, I described it as, it's kind of corporate Tai Chi. You give it to me, I turn it around, I push it back to somebody else, okay? That doesn't work. I mean, it might work for a while, but it's not going to help you be successful throughout your career. Yeah.
No, I mean, my theory was more so, letting, what was there's a well-known phrase with regards to the, I think it was the IBM executive who lost the company at that time, like $600,000 in a procurement situation. And they asked him, why did you not fire him? And he was like, well, we've just trained him $600,000 to not do that mistake.
Yeah, you're going to make a mistake. Just don't make it over and over, But there is some truth to the whole idea of, stay in your lane, bro. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So we have swim lanes. Okay. So one of the things we are very conscious of is we don't want other parts of the company to be negotiating commercial terms, whether that's price, delivery, other things, with our suppliers. In the same way, I don't want my team negotiating technical statements of work. Okay. We come into companies with expertise. And so we have to recognize the expertise that the other organizations have, and they need to recognize our expertise. And as long as we're working together and staying in our swim lanes, we're very successful. So I think that's a critical piece.
Sure. I mean, one key thing that is, of course, well recognized or respected is that NXP operates in a very highly competitive and fast-paced environment. So how do you balance, let's say, cost optimization with maintaining strong relationships with the suppliers and ensuring that there's, a win-win situation between you guys?
Yeah, so it's not one or the other. It's always both and. So when we look at how we're going to make sourcing decisions, and I would think it would be the same as well as sales decisions, it's what is the balance? So we look at a balanced scorecard. What is our relationship with the supplier? What is the nature of their technology? What is their cost structure? What is their manufacturing expertise? And so we do this process where we take all these factors and they weigh into how we're going to make the decision and who we're going to work with. If you focus only on price or only on technology or only on other aspects, you've created this situation that you're always going to fail on some aspect of it. So the more holistically that you can look across your supply chain, you can look at your customer base, you can look at your own internal manufacturing footprint, then I think that's what delivers the best results. So, in semiconductors, this idea of, a fully integrated IDM to, fabless company and everything in between. Organizations, including NXP, has to take a look at and make a decision on where do we believe our sweet spot is for the products that we manufacture, for the customers that we have, and the industries that we serve, because that model is always going to continue to shift. And so, being able to support that and, drive results as part of the work that you do, I think can be very rewarding within the company.
Yeah. I mean, when you look at your, career per se, you were, I'm intrigued to know, like, what was the experiences that you got from a fabless company like AMD to an IDM like NXP, and what are some of the most important strategies that have helped you excel in the role that you're doing at both of the organizations?
Yeah, and they're very, very different. I think when you look at a fabless company, they really focus on developing the product. How can we make the best possible performing product, often in the most advanced nodes, to service a particular segment of the marketplace? When you look at an IDM, it's different because the amount of value creation you do in an IDM is greater than in a fabless company. I know that's kind of hard to say, and they perhaps don't want to hear it, but you're taking, raw materials and manufacturing them in the products, your own wafers. In fact, when I was at onsemi pulled its own crystal ingot.
Yeah.
So you can't get more, kind of
to the source.
Yeah, Ford Motor Company from the ground to the vehicle than you did at a company like at onsemi. And they take different kinds of expertise. I would think at an IDM, it's more about having a very strong commodity knowledge, supplier relationship knowledge, and negotiations and contracting knowledge. When you look at a fabless company, it's really more about the technology. So something like procurement becomes secondary to the design and engineering parts of the house. And perhaps in IDMs it's the same way, but it may be a little bit different of a balance.
Did you see from your perspective on that lean supply chain management process where you saw lean principles applying to the semiconductor industry? And I'd be intrigued to know is like, how do you ensure that efficiency doesn't compromise quality?
Yeah. So I've scratched my head often in the semiconductor industry about how do you apply lean manufacturing to a semiconductor process, especially front-end operations, wafer manufacturing, just simply because of how it's done. So in TPS, it's all about one-piece flow. It's all about efficiencies, et cetera. You can't do that in a foundry. That's just not how it's done. So the way in which lean manufacturing applies goes back to the synthesis. You're really now talking about lean methodologies in supply chain, in inventory management, and about distribution and transportation. Because as you're bringing in, your raw materials into your, into your foundry, or even, into your back end operations, your assembly and test, the flows are different, and so you have to optimize that. And then you have in the front of it, you have going into the customer direct or your disti network. So managing that's where you draw in the lean methodologies. Now you can use lean manufacturing techniques much more fully in the assembly and test side of the house, just simply the way you're going to lay it out, the number of testers, how you're going to do it. So there's more opportunity there. Quality is never an item that's sacrificed. So, there was, often people would say quality is the table stakes, okay? It's more than the table stakes. In fact, everything that most semiconductor companies do is about the quality. It's about the focus on the customer. What does the customer want, and how do we assure they have the highest quality possible? So if you're selling to, and you can pick, in the automotive industry, whether it's directly to an OEM or to a Continental or somebody like that, or in cell phones you're selling to Apple or Samsung, they all expect perfect quality. Yeah. No one is willing to accept poor quality. And TPS will tell you that lean manufacturing, production, and supply chain efficiencies don't mean poor quality, they mean higher quality. Because now you're much more repeatable in the kinds of work that you're doing, and so there's less surprises in the entire process.
Thank you for the overview. What I want to do, in specific, I could go a little bit more deeper in terms of understanding the supply chain disruptions that have impacted nearly every industry over the past few years. But, from what I would like to understand is that I think it's quite straightforward how to build a resilient supply chain. And if another pandemic came again, I think everyone will be better prepared, hopefully, fingers crossed. But from a thought leadership perspective, you're also a published author with 6 books to your credit, right? What inspired you to write about procurement and supply chain management? You work on it every day. It seems that, when people say, you want to do what your passion is, I think you've used it to kind of shape your life, per se. So I'd like to kind of understand, like, where does this inspiration come from? Where's this passion come from?
Yeah, so let me start first by answering the question of, kind of this global supply shock that we had. It wasn't equal in every part of the semiconductor industry. In fact, it really was only on the end item chip availability and in certain industries. At the conference that I mentioned that I was at last week, I was with a director of procurement from General Motors, and she and I were talking about what happened, how did it happen. And I think a lot of it was a lack of understanding by the end item industries as to what semiconductor manufacturing looks like.
Right. Because
typically in automotive, if you're a hardware supplier, the tooling is dedicated to the customer, and if they don't order from it, then it just goes idle. That's not semiconductor. What happened in that industry is that when we got into the COVID crisis, businesses shut down, they dropped all their demand signals essentially down to zero, and that capacity then became free capacity for someone else, somewhere else. By the time some of these industries, including automotive, realized what was happening, their capacity was gone because there wasn't a contracted corridor. So subsequent to that, companies like GM and Ford and others stepped in to negotiate directly. I mean, not only with the Continentals and Bosches of the world, but now with the the onsemi's and the NXPs and others down to the foundry level, negotiating directly with global foundries and TSMC and others. So they realize, okay, we need to get better knowledge of this. So that's kind of what happened there. Now, with regard to the passion, so for me, as I said, I never anticipated being here. And part of that was I never really had any good modeling or mentoring to say, this is what life could be. This is what a career could be. So I found that it was a passion for me to be able to give back the experiences that I had, hopefully that someone now in another generation who is like what I had been has resources and has the ability. So, in addition to doing the books, I've funded a couple scholarships, one at Michigan State and one at Arizona State, for exactly that purpose. I was an inner city kid whose parents couldn't pay for him to go to college. I had to work, I had to do other things. So it's all about this idea that, maybe it's a karma thing, what you give is what you receive. So I've always felt very strongly about that. It's not that I thought, hey, you know what? Wincel has some great ideas. He's going to write a book. He's going to become a millionaire. No, this is what I've learned. And if I can help anybody else in our industry, that's what I'm going to do. So, I've been part of ISM. I've been part of their board of directors. Again, it's that whole idea of being able to give back and to help the next generation of emerging professionals to become even better and have more resources than what we had in my generation.
I mean, that's a sincere respect on that.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think one of the key things when you're looking at how you assist people, I think there is no such thing as self-made. There's always someone that's opened the doors for you previously in the past, and anybody that's listening to this, and you might have someone that's opened doors for you in the past. Pick up the phone, give them a call, check up on them. Life's short. Your experience teaching at Arizona State University gives you, of course, a unique vantage point on how the next generation is thinking about supply chain management. I would be intrigued, and I'm sure there's many that will be listening to this, is how have students' perspectives and priorities in this field shifted over the time?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think my position, I would share with you what I've heard from Michael Crow, who's the president of ASU, is that if we look to this next generation, and these are the people that we have to rely on, we should be very excited and encouraged, not disappointed. The ability of the younger generation is incredible. The things they have access to, the knowledge they have, the way in which they see the world is transformational. It's all about trusting they have the ability to do that and providing the guidance and mentorship to make it happen. So what I see from a supply chain, from when I studied it in the late 1980s till today, is again, supply chain, procurement, it was a back office function, okay? Now it's core to the business. People see this. The pandemic and supply crisis, accomplished that. 5 years ago, nobody knew what a semiconductor was, and nobody cared about supply chain. Now we have more help than we need or want. But people are seeing this as a great opportunity. At a school like ASU, it's not that if you're studying supply chain, your only option is to study supply chain. You can study supply chain and build on different parts and dual degree opportunities that expand what's possible. So it's not unusual to have a supply chain degree and an engineering degree. I've seen supply chain degrees and, they have a Herberger School of Arts, pulling those degrees in. So there's all kinds of combinations, these students have the opportunity to do. And their interest and engagement is off the charts. For me, I just want to get done. I just need to get in and get out, get a job. It's different now. It really is. Now, when as a professor, I can come in and I can tell you within the first couple weeks what grade about everybody in the class is going to get. And you can tell that by the engagement, the conversation, the things that they're talking about, the way they look at the business. So it's still part of helping to pull those people along who may not be fully engaged, but that it would be helpful for them to be engaged.
I mean, for those who unfortunately don't have the fortune to have access to yourself, Jeff, is I think one of the most key questions that they'll be pondering is what advice would you give to someone that's just starting their career in procurement and supply chain management today?
Yeah, so there was an ISM Global Conference that Carly Fiorina was the speaker. Okay. And she was talking about her career. And one of the things she said, which I mentioned earlier, was when there's a fire, run towards it. Okay. Even if it's not your fire, run towards the fire. Figure out how can you be of help. And if you can't be of help, they're going to tell you, thank you, but there's nothing you can do. But you'll be perceived very early on in your career as being someone who is intelligent, willing, capable, always there to step outside the box. The other thing is be curious. Always be curious. Ask the questions. Don't assume just because something's being done in a company it's the right thing. It's just done because that's the way it's done. And then build your life outside of your job. Yeah. I'm at a point now where I'm much closer to retirement than the beginning of my career, and so are my peers. There was a friend of mine who retired. Actually, two. So I'm going to give you two contrasts. So one of my friends retired from ST Micro, 55 years old, fairly young to retire, but had so many other interests outside of his job as a senior VP at ST that he loves being retired. He spends time with his family. He and his wife have all kind of activities. They travel. He supports the community, et cetera. The second is I had another friend who retired from an OSAT company. Most of what he did was within that identity of who he was working. And so when he retired, and he retired at 60, he lasted about a year. And he said, I got to go back. Wow. I'm just bored beyond belief. Wow. So when you build your career, you have to recognize at some point it will come to an end. And when it does come to an end, then what? Are you going to just sit on the porch in a rocking chair, or are you going to be engaged? Are you going to still be part of professional organizations? Are you going to teach? Are you going to mentor? Are you going to contribute? What are you going to do? And if you don't start that early in your career, you'll probably never get to it. So, you and I were talking before that, you just did the Stanford program. I had been working, had a successful corporate career. I had my own consulting company. And then I decided about 22 or 23 years after I finished my MBA, I'm going back to get another degree. So I went back to Loyola University in Chicago. I got a master's degree. And it's like, why did you do that? Are you going to use that in your career? And it's like, probably not. But I'm interested in this. I have the time. I have the means. I'm going to do this. And to me, those are the kind of things that you want to do. Another personal example is, I think it was 43 or 44, I started taking karate. Okay.
Oh.
Now, what 44-year-old takes karate? So I go into the dojo and I asked him. I said, "Do you have an old fat man's class? Because that's what I need." And because as a child, I wanted to take karate, but again, my family didn't have the means. But this was something that stuck with me. So I started taking karate at 43. I committed myself to it. I got pretty good. I started fighting in tournaments. I started winning tournaments. Okay. So it doesn't matter. And so I was pleased that I was able to demonstrate to my children, doesn't matter how old you are, try something new, try something different. You know, I would come home, you know, on Thursday night would be sparring night at the dojo. I would come home and there would be nights I would have got my butt kicked. I got knocked out one time, I had bruises, you know, but they could see that. And so I know that's kind of off topic, but I think it's really relevant for people earlier in their career to make sure that they're kind of, this idea of work-life balance to me isn't about, am I working or not working? It's, what am I working at? Am I working at business? Am I working at personal development, growth? What am I working at? That's, to me, work-life balance.
I think one of the key points that kind of connect to everything that you've kind of, this is like connecting the dots backwards, as they say. That's a Steve Jobs phrase, is there are evidently certain values you don't play around with.
Yeah.
And I think these ways of, the way you've lived your life have been evidently emphasized on certain values. What would you say are the key values you don't play around with?
Well, I think integrity is one of those. In fact, early in my career, I left a job because I felt that my professional integrity was compromised, that the behavior of the company was not reflective of who I wanted to be, who I thought myself to be, and there was nothing I could do to make it change. I really couldn't influence the company. So I walked away from a job with nothing out on the dock. It's like, I can't do this. So that whole idea of integrity is critical. I've also said it's not important necessarily to be liked, but being liked is a nice thing.
Sure.
But it's more important to be respected. And by being respected doesn't mean people respect you because of the position you hold. They respect you because you do what you say you're going to do. Yeah. They can count on you, that what you see is what you get. So there's very little difference between me and my professional life and me and my personal life. Now, there's always some, it's things I don't want you to know. But generally, that's the thing that you do. And then I think the last thing is probably you have to be true to yourself, okay? Don't let other people push you around. Don't let, and I don't mean that from a bullying standpoint, but don't let other people influence you in a way that you become something other than who you are. You have to trust your integrity. This whole idea, what does your gut tell you? That's a real thing. You have to trust your intuition. What is it telling you? And, make sure you're always true to yourself on that.
This is a very well-known phrase. I think there was a case study that I kind of read. It was by the CEO of Fastenal. They supply they supply construction materials to many shops, and they have an accountability phrase called "We said, we did." And I think this kind of relates very, very direct to you. I mean, it's all about accountability at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
So with over 35 years in procurement and supply chain management, who are you then? Are you going to be the guy that basically just retires and enjoys his family time and, I don't know, does keeps going on karate or goes for championships? Or are you going to be the guy that's going to be like, right, I'll retire 1 year and then come back to the game and start my own consulting gig again?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Where are you?
My wife.
Where do you see yourself?
My wife will ask me, "What is it you want to be when you grow up?" Okay,
I'm
61, and if I'm not grown up, I don't know what's going to happen. Again, a lot of strange things I've done in my career or my life. One of those things was I made a ill-fated attempt to run for Congress when I lived in Michigan. So
did you?
It was only during the primary season. But the gentleman who was the treasurer for my campaign, and I had known through some of the professional work I had done, said, retirement is not an event, it's a process. And by that, what he meant was, you may retire, but something will come along and draw you back in for a period of time, and then you retire again. And something will draw you back in for a period of time, and you retire again. And so that really stuck with me. So personally, I've already retired twice. Now, I don't know if the third one will stick, but I kind of look at it in the way professional athletes retire or coaches for professional teams. Okay, I'm retired from this team, and then 2 years later I show up somewhere else. Why is that? Is because you couldn't make a decision, you didn't want to call? No, it's because the world is not static. The world is dynamic. My life is dynamic. Our experiences are dynamic. Our opportunities are dynamic. So you have to be willing to take the challenge or not as they come, but never feel like you're painted into this static world where nothing is going to change. So if I were to retire tomorrow, what I might do for the next few months will be different than the months after that, will be different than the months after that, and I may come back, I may not. I may start my own new business, I may not. It's you just have to be open to the possibility. Yep. I think of all the things, that we've talked about, for me, my biggest success has been my wife and I have been extremely fortunate in our lives because we were always prepared to accept an opportunity when it came. I think often, people say, well, I've never been given the opportunity. You probably have, but maybe you missed it. And it's not about making rash decisions and jumping into something without thinking about it. It's about being prepared that when the opportunity comes by, you take it and you see where it goes. And if it goes in the direction you want, you stay with it. And if it doesn't, you move on. But people are afraid. One of the things when, you mentioned the books, I've mentioned the books. I hear all the time people say, I want to write a book. And my first question to them is, what's stopping you? And usually what's stopping them is themselves. Yeah. People love to have a dream, whatever the dream is, to write a book, to become an actor, to do all these other things. But when it really comes down to it, it's appealing as a dream, but not as a reality, because you have to put the work in. And it's not fun. People like to say, okay, Jeff, you're a CPO, you're a senior vice president working for a multi-billion-dollar company. Oh, how great that is. Yeah, but what about all the 25, 30, 35 years it took to get there? Yeah. Are you willing to put that work in? And, because it's not straight line. It's ups and downs, and some of the valleys are pretty deep, and it's like, and, by the time you're my age in my career, you've lost a couple jobs. You've been downsized out. You've been fired, whatever the case is. And that has some very interesting dynamics to it.
Looking back at these valleys that you've been on, up and down, up and down, up and down, from your early days in the procurement to where you are right now, leading a team at a multi-billion-dollar organization, what would you consider your proudest achievement?
Proudest achievement in life or proudest achievement in corporate?
I would say both. I'd be intrigued and learn about both.
Life and well, I know this will sound cliche, but I think my proudest achievement in life is my children. Sure. We live in a very difficult world, and I'm not sure I'd want to be a young person in today's world with, everything is recorded, et cetera. But I'm very proud of my children, the way they've turned out. Now, is it what I would have envisioned for them in their lives? Probably not. But, they've found their path, and they're happy with what they do. I have 6 kids. A couple of them are married, and some, babies, grandchildren I have. But they're all good people. They have loving spouses or, boyfriends, girlfriends. They're respectful of their parents. I mean, to me, that's the greatest thing. I think the proudest achievement in my corporate life probably doesn't have anything to do with my positions or success. It really has to do with being able to be a mentor and be available for people coming up in the organizations. To me, that's kind of the joy of my life. Of all the things that we do at work, my favorite time is we do an employee recognition for our procurement team once a year. And of all the meetings I have and all the announcements I make, I look forward to that. Who is our, front-end Procurement Excellent Award winner? Who's our CPO award winner? And, we make a big deal out of it. We'll host a dinner. We'll bring people in. We'll incorporate it as part of a summit. So those are the things, to me, it's my highlights are not about me. They're about other people.
Beautiful. Jeff, I mean, this has been, I mean, I could go on for another hour with you. The time is of the essence here. We have a tradition on this podcast, and it's going to be continuing for, God willing, hundreds of episodes ahead, where the last guest leaves a question for the next guest. I'm going to start it off with you. So my question to you is, what are you most excited about right now, whether professionally or outside of work?
Wow, good question. I'll answer professionally. So as I mentioned, I've been involved in some of the mergers and acquisitions work of NXP. We just announced that we have a joint venture with Vanguard, and we're opening a new foundry in Singapore. So to me, that's very exciting, being part of that team. Being on the executive steering committee, I'm an alternate to the board of directors there. That's very exciting. Seeing something created from the ground up, working with an amazing partner like Vanguard, it's based on TSMC technology, couldn't be more exciting than that.
Nice, awesome. Where is my notepad? Jet, can I have the notepad, please? This is your opportunity to think of a question to give it to the next guest.
So I'll just write it down. I don't need to tell you what it is. Okay, perfect. I will do so. Because I need my glasses to see. That's what happens when you get old. I'm not a young guy like you. All right, there you go.
So, Jeff, thank you for joining the podcast, mate. First one. Look forward to the next 100 one. I'll be like, hey, Jeff.
Yeah, good luck, man.
I'd love to have you on another show.
Anytime.